And I think with that too, it kind of comes back full circle to what you described in the beginning of our talk with the impetus for wanting to write this article, where you felt there was this tension between, um, your use like critical theory. So you come to that point where how do I try to resolve or find a way to maneuver through this tension? And I'm wondering if these issues maybe they speak to another underlying tension that we felt circulates in the article as well, um, between what we spoke about before with academic knowledge production, which remains largely rarefied and privileged, and is increasingly a market incentivized process. And then the lived realities of real people in real communities engaged in real struggles. And so, how do you, to kind of come to an end full circle, how do you conceive of this tension between academic knowledge production and its efficacy within and outside higher education, right? So I'm kind of how, and maybe in another way of putting it, but through writing this article, having these discussions, how has that tension for yourself with this become, if resolved at all?
That's a really good question. That's probably in another article. So I think that one of the things that, if we go back to the point, I'm not trying to say Indigenous thought should, help out critical theory, but certainly what critical theory can learn from it is that knowledge creation, engagement and enrichment doesn't just occur in certain rarefied institutions. So I think that's an important point, but I think it's something, again, that could be considered a common plane in both traditions, because critical theory itself, the original Frankfurt School was deliberately set up to be outside the formal German higher education system so that it could think those things that were unthinkable within a traditional university. And also a very big theme of it is this sense of moments of exile or sanctuary, that in order to understand how do we work for greater social justice within an unjust system? How do we resist the mainstream when we're part of it? And all of that, how do we resist the status quo when we're so bound up in ensuring it keeps going? And I think this is where universities have, in a sense, a heroic and an evil role. So they can, as you say, increasingly marketise places, and they can be cutting down these opportunities all the time. I suppose the bit of me that wants to hold on to hope is that I still see a role for universities as places where we can find moments of sanctuary for thought. And this is where my latest work is going in terms of understanding what that is. But I do think it's also, if we go back to the spirit of critical theory, even though we find it a lot, we're talking about these white European men in their universities, the actual essence of the ideas is about knowledge having more diverse forms and being created in different ways. And certainly where you have the extrapolation of it into critical pedagogy, you have many examples there of the democratization of knowledge. So I think you're right. I think there's a tension in critical theory, because I think on the one hand, it can seem quite elitist, and it can be just in the sense that it's incredibly hard to penetrate, from the outside. But I think that we can rescue from some of its core ideals, though, principles of democratizing, broadening, other forms of knowledge, because unless we have those, we can't resolve this problem of hidden forms of oppression. So that's more attention within critical theory, and I think you're you're right, though, that the situation is really quite difficult, and it may well be that we are going to, I don't want to have a golden age view of universities as though they were once wonderful sanctuaries for, you know, great emancipatory thought, because universities have always been institutions of power and privilege. You know, from their very, very beginnings, they were established, you know, to ensure some groups had privileges over others. But I do think we can see some principles that have emerged over time that are still aspirational. But what worries me is that we are losing those spaces, which is perhaps gets back in a circle to, that's why we need allies. You know, so we've just got to this position. If I think of when I left Australia 25 years ago, or when I first encountered Indigenous thought as a high school student, what has happened in that intervening time is massive in terms of universities embracing and understanding, appreciating the richness of diverse epistemologies and cultures. And I suppose it gets back to that point we started at the start, we're in a decolonial age. We're in a decolonial age, at the same time, we're in this increasingly marketized and all of those tensions. So what we need to do is look to help each other to stop this, because what a shame to have had this flourishing of Indigenous thought and then just turn it into something where universities sell tea towels of Aboriginal art. You know, it's just not what it's about. And that pressure is always there, because the status quo is so powerful, because it's relentless and because it mutates and transforms. So it gathers up any new, you know, areas of different thought or resistance, other ways of thinking. It can gather them in and domesticate them. And so I think we have to be allies in opposing that as best we can.